like to ask you, have you calculated out, should the President's initiative and the EPA's rules go into effect, how much will that increase the cost for your consumers in terms of the monthly bill? Have you been able to calculate that?
We have estimated that the cost of being forced to install, and assuming that carbon capture storage equipment were available, which, you know, as I've indicated, is not commercially available today. But based upon the best estimates available and the amount of additional parasitic load that's taken away from power that would otherwise go to customers to power this additional equipment that's required to capture and sequester that CO2, the price of power could effectively double.
Could effectively double.
Yes.
Texas is a pretty popular state right now and a prosperous state.
Yes, sir.
Right now. Do you have some senior citizens, maybe on fixed incomes, some young families that find the doubling of their power costs difficult to be able to accommodate for their family budget?
Absolutely.
Where are they going to go to get that additional money?
That's a good question.
Maybe we ought to ask the EPA and the President where they're supposed to get the money to be able to pay the bill. Would you view this basically as taxation via regulation?
I'm probably not the best person to ask that question. I'm a power plant guy. What I know is that the regulations are driving up the cost of producing power.
Mr. Brown, you're in business. You're working. Is this taxation via regulation?
It could be looked at that way, yes.
And
but we're not going to be able to afford to pay those taxes.
But you aren't going to be able to afford it. I think Mr. Lichtemeyer's point in terms of going up to 54% of your overall costs, and that expands your margins. Where are your people going to get a job if we've relinquished those to people overseas?
They're not going to.
They're not going to be able to do it. And we've got a 7.6% unemployment rate right now, Professor, and you and I both know that's probably not an accurate figure, that it's actually much higher when we look at people that are underemployed, people that have simply given up looking for work right now. And I see Mr. Gardner nodding his head in agreement with that. What is the base impact? We're talking about businesses. Businesses employ people. Is this a way to move forward, or are there more sensible approaches?
Well, look at it this way. Energy really drives the economy. There's a pretty close relationship between economic growth and energy consumption. It's about 0.3. In other words, for every 1% increase in GDP growth, you need 1/3% increase in energy production. What has bothered me in recent years is that the fact that America is rich, the fact that we're abundant in energy, the fact that we have cheap energy is somehow a bad thing. And in fact, the availability of abundant and cheap energy is the basis of our international competitiveness. So why do we constantly talk about policies that are going to drive up the cost of energy when those costs, it seems to me, are going to far exceed any benefits in terms of environmental quality? So if we want to continue growing this economy, we need adequate supplies of cheap and abundant energy. And this isn't the forum for me to get on my soapbox, but why do we behave as though we're an energy-poor nation when we're an energy-rich nation? I mean, we should not only, we export a lot of coal, we should be exporting natural gas, we should be exporting oil. But there's a mindset, particularly in Washington, that we have got to husband these resources. So it seems to me, someone who spent most of his professional life focusing on economic growth and policies to encourage economic growth, that we have before us in terms that haven't been spelled out with this climate action policy, regulations, policies that are going to retard economic growth, not stimulate it.
So would it be a fair assessment, Doctor? Mr. Gardner commented about a sluggish economy right now. To have an American policy rather than the EPA and the President's fiat out of the White House as opposed to going through Congress, to actually develop American energy on American soil, to be able to put Americans back to work, to make us competitive in the world, and actually make us prosperous? Is that maybe a good idea?
Well, absolutely. And, you know, I'm not opposed to green energy. And I remember during the campaign, President Obama was saying that on his watch, 85,000 jobs have been created in clean energy. What he didn't mention was that 500,000 new jobs have been created in the oil and gas industry with no new federal incentives.
There we go.
But we don't, we don't acknowledge that. We don't acknowledge the fact that we are the richest nation in the world when it comes to energy. We produce more coal, we produce more nuclear, we produce more renewable energy, and we're number 2 in oil.
Right. You know, I would like you to maybe speak just a little bit, Doctor, if you would, about the reliability on the electrical grid. As you noted, we do not have the technology right now to be able to store energy that is generated. I have a piece of legislation in calling for all of the above. But we've got to make sure that we can deliver that base load so that Mr. Brown can do his castings, and Mr. Kezar is going to be able to deliver to his consumers as well. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Well, understand, I'm an economist. I'm not a technical person. But when it comes to reliability on the power grid, there are 2 issues. One is the physical capability to move electrons around the country. And then 2 is having adequate generating capacity to meet peak demand. And my concern with these GHG regulations is that they will limit, they'll take additional units off stream, and that could occur in a time frame when alternatives are not available, and then we have to deal with reliability in terms of just having enough electrons on the grid.
You know, just kind of final question for you, Doctor. The Regulatory Flexibility Act is a federal statute, and it does obligate agencies to consider alternative regulatory approaches if the rule has a substantial economic impact on a significant number of small entities, and we've heard about those this morning. How would you rate the EPA's compliance with this statute?
I think the EPA is more, pretty much ignoring the statute.
Just ignoring it, like they ignored this hearing. Mr. Brown, a number of experts have credit lower and stable domestic energy prices for helping contribute to domestic energy manufacturing rebound. How important are stable energy prices for your business?
Well, our customers would love that. That way they could know what their products are going to cost. And when they do fluctuate, so does the price of those materials, and to get them their materials. So having a constant price would be wonderful for everybody. And knowing what we can charge year over year, we can only go to our customers so many times for price increases. And when the energy fluctuates so much in price, that changes the price of that product.
Thank you. Mr. Kezar, the EPA has recently sent a draft of new NSPS emission limit regulations to the White House for review, and it did not consult small business. Has this been the agency's pattern for an extended period of time on other rules that affect small power producers?
That's been my experience recently, yes, sir.
Never bothered to consult you or to be able to seek your input?
No, sir.
The Clean Air Act stipulates that the EPA can determine that it is not technologically feasible or cost-effective to establish a standard of performance for certain types of emissions from certain facilities, Mr. Kezar. In your view, does this apply to greenhouse gas emissions from coal-fired power facilities?
Well, the problem, Mr. Chairman, is that what EPA effectively did is combined all fossil fuel-fired sources into one category and then set an emissions limit that was based upon emissions from a natural gas combined cycle unit and applied those to all fossil fuel-fired plants, and that's just not a feasible thing to do. There was no subcategorization whatsoever.
So is the EPA, are they required to establish a standard that they know is too costly?
No, sir.
They aren't.
No, sir.
We've got some real challenges. Mr.